This short video is basically about a place I visited back in 2018 on the Somme in France. Somewhere where I've wanted to visit for a long time, and had the opportunity in 2018 to spend a week on the battlefields, visiting the sites and the cemeteries. One of the cemeteries I wanted to visit was in a place near Metz on the Somme, the Devonshire Cemetery. And the reason I wanted to go there was quite simple, really. The 8th and 9th battalions of the Devonshire Regiment, particularly the 9th battalion, was made up by a lot of men from my hometown in Rochdale in Lancashire. Now, these men probably were attested into the Devons to backfill for men that had already been killed, because that's what tended to happen. So during the course of my research over the last maybe 10-15 years or so, it became apparent that a lot of lads from this town served with the 9th Devons. So it was always somewhere that I'd wanted to go, to the Devonshire Cemetery. There are 163 burials within that cemetery, 153 of which are known soldiers. The other 10 are unknown soldiers. Of those 153, 151 are men from the 8th and the 9th battalion of the Devons, who were all killed on the 1st of July 1916. Now, that date is synonymous in military history. It was the first day of the first Battle of the Somme. There were subsequent battles on the Somme, but the first Battle of the Somme began on July the 1st, 1916. So I wanted to go there to look at it, to pay my respects, and just to see where some of the events of that tumultuous day actually unfolded. Little bit of a rewind. One of the company commanders of the 9th Devons was a chap by the name of Captain Duncan Lennox Martin. He wasn't a local lad to Rochdale. In fact, he was born overseas. And Captain Martin, before the big advance, before the big push on the 1st of July, had been on leave back in the UK, and he'd made a plasticine model of the area where his men were due to attack. And it predicted that as his men emerged from the trenches over a rise which was subsequently called Mansell Copse, they would be faced with a German machine gun. And the German machine gun was emplaced beneath what they called the shrine, which was in the Metz village cemetery. So all this was made known to the hierarchy, and prior to the 1st of July, the Royal Artillery bombarded the German front lines, and it was hoped that this particular German machine gun would have been taken out by the artillery. So move forward now to the 1st of July, excuse me, and again, this is not a history lesson or an in-depth account of what happened on that day, but you know, it's my take on what happened on that day, put very succinctly. 7:28 AM on the 1st of July 1916, 16 mines which had been laid by the Royal Engineers, tunnellers companies of the Royal Engineers, which had been laid underneath the German front lines, were detonated. And that more or less signalled the start of what was to become one of the bloodiest days in British military history. So these mines explode, and one of them, which is now known as the Lochnagar crater, was huge, absolutely massive. It's said that the spoil from the explosion rose into the sky up to a distance of a mile. So you can just imagine how incredible this explosion would have been. Shortly after the explosions, the men emerged from the trenches and they started making their way towards the German front lines. They were told to be totally silent and to walk not run towards the German front line. The artillery, unfortunately, hadn't silenced the German machine gun, and this machine gun opened fire on the 9th Battalion, and it decimated the battalion. Company after company of men went over the top and were slaughtered. So much so that every officer of the 9th Battalion, except one, was either killed, wounded, or was reported missing at the final roll call of the day. Every single officer. Over half the battalion was killed. So, what happened next? A couple of days later, members of the battalions returned to the frontline trenches, to the British frontline trenches where the men had emerged from, and they began to bury their dead. 151 men of the Devonshires were buried in what was the British frontline trench. That British frontline trench is now the Devonshire Cemetery, and that's the reason I wanted to go. The men from Rochdale that perished were buried alongside men from Wales, from London, and from Devon. But the makeup of the 9th Battalion was such that lots of lads from Lancashire and London made up that battalion, and it was affectionately known by the men as the London and Lancs Battalion because of that fact. So the men were buried in what is now the Devonshire Cemetery, and a wooden plaque was erected, and the wooden plaque read, "The Devonshires held this trench, the Devonshires hold it still." Sometime after the Great War finished, there's nothing great about war, don't get me wrong, but that's how we refer to the First World War, the Great War. That plaque vanished, and years later, decades later, a group of men visited the Devonshire Cemetery, and within this group were then current officers of the Devonshire Regiment and other officers from other regiments, and they decided that they would replace the wooden plaque that had subsequently been taken or deteriorated or whatever happened to it, nobody really knows, with a stone. And within this stone is a carving with those immortal words, "The Devonshires held this trench, the Devonshires hold it still." And that was unveiled on the 70th anniversary of the first day of the Battle of the Somme. That was unveiled by the Duke of Kent in 1976. A very poignant place, a very quiet place. One could only imagine what it was like all those years ago on the 1st of July 1916. And now in the second part of this video I will tell you a little bit more about the local men of Rochdale who are forever laid to rest in that foreign field. These are just some of the men who are buried in Devonshire Cemetery. These 11 men that you can see now are all natives of Rochdale and the surrounding areas. Their ages range from 19 to 33. We've got Ernest Bolton, Walter Clayton Calverley, Frederick Edward Cartwright, Frank Clayton, Braham Greenwood, Robert Henry Hill, Albert Kershaw, Tom Tetlock Midgley, Samuel Ogden, William Pomfret and Frederick Cheetham Taylor. They may have come from different areas of the town, but the one thing they all had in common is they all answered the call to the colours, and they all did what they thought was right, doing the duty for the king and for the country. And they paid the ultimate price. They never came home from France. They were all killed on the 1st of July 1916. Ordinary men doing extraordinary things. It's quite incredible, really. A lost generation. Men that should never be forgotten. Men that I will never forget. I never knew any of them. But I think we owe them all a massive debt of gratitude. And we should be forever grateful for the sacrifices that they made.